In this part, we'll talk about the peripheral nervous system, and we'll start off with, general classification of nerve fibers, and then talk about the cranial nerves. So the peripheral nervous system, as you guys should know by now, are made out of your cranial nerves, and those are the nerves coming out of the brain. Those are, we've got 12 pairs. And then the spinal nerves, and those are 31 pairs, and those come out of the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is divided function-wise into somatic nervous system, and that controls the skeletal muscles and would carry sensory information from the skin, while the autonomic nervous system is more of the subconscious activities, and those will connect your CNS to the viscera. The structure of a peripheral nerve. So a nerve is made out of a bundle of axons. So if you get tons of axons and you wrap them together, okay, you will eventually be making a peripheral nerve. These nerves need protection, so they are covered with 3 layers of connective tissue. We have the epineurium, and that covers the whole nerve from the outside. And then the perineurium, and that covers each fascicle. And then the endoneurium, and that covers each individual nerve cell. Okay, so you can see it here. Okay, the endoneurium is that covering that covers each individual nerve cell. So they kind of parallel the connective tissue coverings of your skeletal muscles. So again, your epineurium covers the whole nerve, peri would cover fascicles, and then each individual nerve cell or each individual neuron would have an endoneurium. When you unwrap the endoneurium, you are going to find the myelin sheath, okay, if this was a myelinated fiber. So that would be your structure of your peripheral nerves. Now, how do we classify them according to function? So we have sensory nerves, motor nerves, and you should know by now what each of these would do, and then mixed nerves. And mixed nerves are nerves that carry both sensory and motor information at the same time. Okay, all of our spinal nerves are mixed nerves, except for the first pair. So remember we said that each spinal nerve has a sensory root and a motor root. They will combine to make a spinal nerve, and that's why spinal nerves are all mixed except for the first cervical. The first cervical is not a mixed nerve. Classification of different nerve fibers, they are subdivided into more types. So we have, these are your general fibers. Okay, so general means that these fibers are associated with general structures. Compare that to your special structures. Okay, special structures are related to special senses, and those are related to head and neck. So any structures related to smell, vision, taste, hearing, or equilibrium would get their innervation from your special nerves, okay, special nerve fibers. Your general, anything else, okay, would get innervation from these general fibers. Remember that sensory is afferent, motor is efferent, so we get that, the same in order to remember which one is which. So breakdown of these fibers, a general somatic efferent fiber. Efferent again means motor. General somatic means that it's going to carry motor impulses to or from the CNS towards your skeletal muscles. Okay, so somatic, remember, that is what sending impulses to things that you have control over, voluntary control. General visceral efferent, these are motor fibers that, again, these fibers will carry impulses from your CNS to smooth muscles and glands, because these are visceral parts, things that you have no voluntary control over, and those would be your smooth muscles and glands. General somatic afferent. Afferent would be sensory. So those will carry sensory impulses from the skin and skeletal muscles towards your CNS. General visceral afferent. Again, these are sensory fibers carrying sensory information from the viscera, the blood vessels, and the internal organs towards your CNS. Now these are special fibers. Okay, and these special fibers, like we said, are associated with specialized structures like the nose, ear, taste buds, and so on. We have special somatic efferent. So these are going to be motor fibers from the brain to the muscles used in chewing, swallowing, speaking, and facial expressions. Okay, so these are somatic because we have voluntary control over them. We do voluntary control chewing, swallowing, speaking, and facial expressions. They are special because they are related to eating. They're also related to speech. Okay, so all of these are more like of special senses. Special visceral afferent fibers, well, these are sensory fibers. They are going to carry sensory fibers to the brain from your viscera, the olfactory, the nose, and your taste receptors in the mouth. Special somatic afferent, well, these are sensory fibers, and these carry sensory information from sight, so from the eye, and from the ear, whether it's the hearing impulses or equilibrium impulses. Now the cranial nerves, we have 12 pairs, and they come, 10 of them come off of the brainstem. They originate from the brainstem, except for 2, one in cranial nerve number 1 and cranial nerve number 2. The cranial nerve number 1 actually starts in the nasal cavity, and that carries smell to the brain, while cranial nerve number 2 originates in the eye, and that's known as the optic nerve, and that obviously carries vision. These nerves will all have to cross into or pass through and synapse in the thalamus, except for the first cranial nerve. Cranial 1, or the olfactory nerve, is actually considered as an outward extension of the CNS. Function-wise, it acts like a nerve, but again, it is really anatomically considered just an outward extension of the CNS towards the nose. Cranial nerves have these Roman numerals, so we number them 1 through 12, and we name them. When you flip the brain upside down, you are going to see them coming out of the brainstem, and we name them from superior to inferior. So you can see here we have the olfactory nerve, the optic nerve, and so from superior all the way down to inferior, we name them cranial 1 through cranial nerve 12, all the way down. So we'll go over these different cranial nerves one at a time. For each one, you want to know, obviously, its name. You want to know, are the fibers sensory or motor or both? And you would want to know, what do they innervate? Okay, so we'll start off with cranial nerve number 1. Cranial nerve number 1 is known as the olfactory nerve. And you can see here that the receptors are found all the way at the top of the nose. So when you want to smell something, you really have to kind of sniff it in, okay, so that you are able to activate the receptors that are found all the way at the top or at the roof of the nose. And then these neurons pass through these little pores in the bone. These are known, that's part is known as the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. And then all of the neurons collect together to make what is known as the olfactory bulb. Now that olfactory bulb right here, the axons collect together to make the olfactory tract, and then it will reach the olfactory cortex. Remember that olfaction or smell does not synapse in the thalamus. Okay, so that's olfactory nerve number 1. These are sensory nerve fibers only. There are no motor fibers. Optic nerve number 2 is another sensory nerve that is associated with the sense of vision. Hey, those obviously originate from the retina and gather together to make an optic nerve. These do synapse in the thalamus and then eventually reach the occipital cortex. Cranial nerves number 3, 4, and 6. So I'll skip 5 for a moment because 3, 4, and 6, all 3 of those are related to the eye. Cranial nerve number 2, we already said, carries vision from the eye. Cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6, they share that they are primarily motor nerve fibers, so they are going to control the movement of the muscles of the eye, and they have proprioceptive fibers. So through these fibers, you are able to tell where your eye is. Is it looking to the right side or to the left side? Is it lateral or medial, up or down, and so on? So that would be your proprioceptive fibers. So now we know 3, 4, and 5, and I'll name them for you. So cranial nerve number 3 is known as the oculomotor, or the motor of the eye. Cranial nerve number 4 is known as the trochlear nerve. And cranial nerve number 6 is known as the abducens nerve. Like I said, all 3 are primarily motor, innervating muscles of the eye. They also have proprioceptive fibers to figure out where the different position of the eye. The biggest of all 3 of those, the one that really supplies most of the eye muscles, are these oculomotor fibers. And, that's where it gets its name from. I am the nerve that moves the eye. I am the oculomotor nerve. And it'll innervate most of the voluntary muscles of the eye. And it also innervate the involuntary muscles, like the ones that adjust, the size of the pupil or adjust the focus of the lens. The trochlear nerve, okay, that is going to innervate just one muscle in the eye. It is a voluntary muscle. And the abducens nerve is another nerve that is only going to innervate one voluntary muscle in each eye. Okay. Now we'll go back to cranial nerve number 5, and that is the trigeminal nerve. That is a mixed nerve. It is one of the largest of the cranial nerves. And as you can see here, it's known as the trigeminal because it is going to split into 3 parts. We have the ophthalmic division, and that is going to carry sensory information from anything surrounding the eye. So the upper part of the forehead, or the frontal part of the forehead, the part that's right above, around the eyebrows, the upper part of the nose. It'll also even carry sensory information from the anterior part of the scalp. It carries sensory information from the upper eyelid and the tear glands. And then you have the maxillary division that goes towards the upper jaw. So it would carry sensory information from the upper jaw, the upper teeth, the lower part of the nose, the cheeks, and the gums, the upper gums. The mandibular division goes all the way down to the mandible, and it will carry sensory info from the lower jaw, the lower lip, the lower teeth, the lower gums. So again, the maxillary and the mandibular division, if you ever get into dental health, these are going to be really important nerves that you're going to be learning a lot more in detail about. So all 3 of those are sensory. Okay, the mandibular division has a little, motor in it. So it'll give out this lingual nerve, and that will supply your tongue, okay? And it also has, lingual is not motor, okay, just to be clear. But it does have, the mandibular division does have motor to supply some of the muscles of mastication, which are the muscles that we use to chew. And it's not that these motor fibers are not showing here on this image. Now, we already talked about cranial nerve number 6, so we'll move on to cranial nerve number 7, or the facial nerve. That's another mixed nerve, so it has both sensory and motor. Your sensory is going to be carrying taste from taste receptors, while the motor fibers innervate the muscles of facial expression. So all of the facial expressions that we're able to perform with all of these facial muscle fibers that you'll be learning in lab would be innervated by the facial nerve. It also innervates or gives motor supply to the tear glands and salivary glands. So what do motor fibers, what on earth are they doing in tear glands and in salivary glands? Well, when we want to secrete tears or secrete saliva, we need the smooth muscle fibers to contract and squeeze those secretions out of the glands. Okay, so the facial nerve is going to innervate these smooth muscles. Cranial nerve number 8, or the vestibulocochlear nerve, that is a purely sensory nerve. It has two parts to it. So the vestibular part, that is going to carry equilibrium, while the cochlear part will carry hearing from the ear. The glossopharyngeal nerve, or cranial nerve number 9, that is a mixed nerve. Okay, so it'll carry, for the sensory portion, well, it carries senses from the pharynx, which is the very back of the throat. It also carries taste from the back of the tongue. Okay, and motor too, it'll send out motor impulses to some of the salivary glands and the muscles of pharynx for swallowing. So if somebody has neurological damage to the glossopharyngeal nerve, they would come in and say that they are having difficulty in swallowing. One of the things that you want to evaluate for patients that are experiencing swallowing difficulties would be this glossopharyngeal nerve. Now, cranial nerve number 10, or the vagus nerve, this nerve is a very long nerve, so it is a cranial nerve that starts from the brainstem and will go all the way down. It'll supply things, it'll give out autonomic supply, parasympathetic supply to the thoracic organs like the lungs and the heart. It also provides parasympathetic supply to the abdominal organs, as you can see here, the liver, stomach, kidney, and the intestine. So you can kind of imagine how long this nerve is. Okay, so it is a mixed nerve. Not only does it have somatic motor muscle fibers for speech and swallowing. So again, if anybody has speech difficulties or swallowing difficulties, one of the nerves that you would want to evaluate as well would be your vagus nerve. It also carries autonomic and sensory information from the thoracic and the abdominal viscera. Cranial nerve number 11, or the accessory nerve. It is also known as the spinal accessory because it gets like a little twig from the spine. And the accessory nerve innervates some muscles of the shoulder. The hypoglossal nerve, and that's the last but not least, cranial nerve number 12, known as the hypoglossal. That is mainly motor. It is going to supply the muscles of the tongue. So from the name, you can tell where it will go. Glossal is the tongue, hypo is underneath. So it give out motor supply to the tongue to help in speaking, chewing, and swallowing. Okay, and it does have some sensory info for proprioception in order to figure out where the tongue is and how are we going to adjust tongue movements when we're speaking. This is a table that has a breakdown of all of your cranial nerves. So whether, telling you the fiber types and then the function. So you could definitely use that. I would recommend making this into flashcards. That would help. Okay, so all 12 of them. This shows the 12 cranial nerves in a, kind of funny image, where cranial nerve number 1 is the olfactory for smell, 2 is optic for vision, 3, 4, and 6, or the oculomotor, trochlear, and the abducens. These are for movements of the eye, and so on. Okay, if you want a bigger image of this in order to print out and kind of put, on your fridge or something, let me know. I do have them as bookmarks as well, so I'll be happy to email them to you. Just shoot me an email, let me know. Okay. This is how you can remember which one are sensory and which one are motor, or which one are both. So going from C1 all the way down to C12, cranial nerve 12, we have sensory, or cranial nerve number 1, the olfactory is sensory. Cranial nerve number 2 is optic, that is sensory as well. Cranial nerve number 3, the oculomotor, that is motor, and so on. Okay, so now you understand kind of how this mnemonic works. Okay, so this ends the cranial nerves, and in the next segment, we are going to be talking about the spinal nerves. See you there.